Welcome to the Simon Says Music podcast. In this series, we will be talking to unsigned and independent music artists and bands about their musical journey so far. In the podcast, I will be joined by my very good friend, music producer, technician, and everything else, Nathan Scott.
Pleasure to be here. Please drop a subscribe on wherever you're listening to this. It helps us out more than you can know, and enjoy.
Today we're joined by a producer, mixer, and songwriter under the name of Dan Scholes. Welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
You too. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Not bad. And you?
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Good.
Enjoying you doing all these podcasts, which is amazing. Meeting
Fantastic.
People,
great to see it get off the ground. So yeah, excited to be here. Thank you very much for having me on.
You're very welcome. So I'm going to let you do most of the talking because I'm sure that nobody wants to hear my voice. I'd just like to know what you actually do.
My main sort of thing is as a producer and songwriter. I work primarily with lots of different artists sort of based in the UK, but also some based in Europe and in the US as well. I've been doing it for a really long time, but it's only been in the last couple of years that I went full time doing it, got to a point where I was able to make the jump to full time. And that's kind of my main thing. So, but I also write and produce for sort of synchronization sort of placements. So like TV, film occasionally, and I do sort of a lot of production demos for songwriters that are trying to pitch their music to the industry and stuff. So little bit of everything, but my main thing is probably on the artist side and also on the synchronization side as well.
Awesome. So I read on your website, there you go, I've done some research and everything, that you specialize in pop, acoustic and pop country. So which one would you say is probably your favorite one out of all of them to record, to produce?
That's a good question. Do you know, I love a lot of different sort of genres of music. So from a writing point of view, I probably write mostly in the likes of pop or singer-songwriter kind of sort of style, but I do love the pop country thing, and actually that's kind of been a sort of passion of mine for a good number of years, listening to that kind of music, and you know, people like Lady A and Brett Young and Little Big Town and sort of acts like that, the Shires over here in the UK. And I love that kind of sort of style of country, that sort of more modern country sort of vibe. And I've got a lot of friends, a lot of songwriter friends based over in the US and in Canada who I write with. And again, they're very sort of country orientated. So that's kind of like a secret passion of mine, in the sense that it's really, really hard to break into as a professional writer, because Nashville is amazing. And I was lucky to go there a couple of years ago, and I did a songwriters retreat over there and wrote with some of the pro writers based out of Nashville, and they are just incredible. But it's a hard industry to crack into, that country sort of thing, because there's so many great writers. And you know, the song, it's all about telling a story, and the lyrics are just incredible. So I love it, but I'm realistic about it at this stage. I think my main strength is probably more on the pop side, or like the singer-songwriter vibe, sort of, you know, the kind of like, I don't know, Dermot O'Kennedy, Lewis Capaldi, Adele, all that kind of sort of style. But I also I've started venturing more into the pop area with, you know, similar sort of kind of artists to Dua Lipa and that kind of vibe. So yeah, it's a hard, basically short answer is it's a hard question to answer, because it depends how I feel. I don't like pigeonholing myself too much. It depends very much on the artists that come through the door as well as to what kind of thing they're going for.
Cool. You said quite a few names there, like say Dua Lipa,
Yeah.
Lewis Capaldi, and Lady A. Would you say they're your inspirations for writing songs, or do you have others?
I probably more from certainly the likes of the more pop sort of area, the things like Dua Lipa and I don't know, just sort of the really sort of pop end of kind of pop music, if you like. It probably inspires me more in terms of from the production side of things. So more as a producer, I'm inspired by certain producers, and so that's probably where I'm coming from in respect to that. From the songwriting side, my songwriting inspiration probably comes from music from a lot further back. I mean, when I started writing when I was a teenager, or I think I was about 13 or 14, when I really started trying to sort of write songs, and I taught myself piano and things like that. And I was probably listening to a lot of pop music of the day when I first started writing that stuff. So a lot of kind of 80s influences, but there was also a lot of 70s influences. So I was heavily influenced by the likes of Queen, and the Beatles were huge. For me, you can't help but be inspired by the Beatles when you grow up in Liverpool, and that's, where I am now. And even artists like, and as I got older, even artists like, James Taylor and sort of all those sort of greats, and the Eagles, all those greats from the late 60s, early mid 70s kind of period, particularly the American sound, that became a really big influence as a songwriter. But I'll take my inspiration from all sorts of different places. You hear things on the radio sometimes, and you just love it when you when you hear something new, and it probably, maybe it's, as a writer, it sometimes forces you to sort of think a little bit differently about your approach. And I never say kind of no to taking inspiration from anywhere, whether it's a really, really kind of 3-minute boppy pop kind of cheese fest, or whether it's something that's that's got maybe a country influence, because I think you can learn from so much. Even those really, really high octane poppy kind of numbers, they have, if you listen to the hooks and some of those things, they've got such incredible hooks. And I try not to be snobbish about these things. I appreciate sort of the kind of vibe that comes from a lot of those different kinds of music.
As a producer,
yeah,
that's often a word sort of bandied around, and I have people asking me, well, what does that actually mean? A lot of the time, and there's various different answers. So for you, what's your sort of process when you come into producing? Are you often there doing a lot of recording or MIDI instruments, things like that, or do you find your main clientele is mainly mixing, mastering, that sort of thing?
Probably most of the stuff that I'm involved with doing now is on I'm sort of doing the full thing. So I'm doing the depending on who the artist is, because some of the artists that I work with, there's one artist that I've worked with a few times. She's an R&B artist from Birmingham, and her name's Darshi, and she's incredible. She's kind of got her songs already written. She's even, in many cases, she's got the kind of beats already there, and she kind of knows what she wants to do, and she knows where she's going with it, and the lyrics, that her voice is there. So with her, it's very much as a vocal producer I'm working as, and as a mixer and mastering the projects for her. But then there's other artists. So I'm really fortunate to work with so many really great up and coming artists. To name a couple, there's one which is kind of he's got quite a big following in the UK, called Ben Davidson, and also another which is Katie, which is spelled K-t. So, and she's a great sort of like R&B singer-songwriter, sort of soulstress kind of artist, and with them I'm very much heavily involved in the writing, and all the production is kind of done by me. So they'll literally come to the table with maybe kind of like an idea of the song that they're kind of going for, maybe a vibe, and they'll sometimes have the lyrics written. Particularly Ben has a very clear idea of kind of where he wants to go, and then what I'll do is I'll start coming up with sort of melody ideas, and I always tend to start my writing from the piano, and then I'll send them just like sort of ideas over, and then we'll just kind of, the song will just sort of gradually form, and then once it gets to a certain level, then it's kind of production time then, and that's when I'll take care of all of the production, so everything will be played or programmed or whatever by me. So and then when it's time for the vocals, we'll get to a point where we're kind of happy with the beat or the instrumental, and I'll send it over to those guys, or in some cases some of the artists I've worked with, they'll actually come and visit my studio and spend a day recording vocals, and then I'll do like the final mix and master. So it varies from artist to artist. For most of the time, I don't get hired that often for just mix and master projects only. Generally speaking, most of the people I'm working with are looking for the kind of full package. They're looking for somebody to do the full production, to kind of turn what's the vision they've got kind of in their head into some kind of reality. And it's great that, because it kind of, sometimes it pushes you out of your comfort zone. Sometimes you have, I've worked on tracks that are really country, I've worked on tracks that have been quite rocky, and then other tracks very pop or reggae, and so as a producer, it's great to get that kind of that variation in the work, because it ultimately makes me better as a producer, because you have to sometimes step outside of your comfort zone to kind of really put something together,
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's nice and refreshing sometimes when you get something completely different. You go, oh, well, I'm actually, this isn't my normal, I know what I'm doing, 1, 2, 3. It's you've got to really look into it and think, and sometimes I have more fun doing that and something that's completely out of my normal comfort zone, as you said. I think
exactly.
Sometimes you can create a whole new level of creativity, really.
It's true. I mean, without a doubt, because I think it probably puts you into a place where you would try things you wouldn't normally try. You know yourself as a producer, but quite often, if you're working in a particular genre of music, you tend to have a go-to place that you start from, when it comes to building tracks, and you can't, whether it's the plugins that you're using, or whether it's the soft synths like Serum or Anna 2, and you've got this library of samples, and you kind of know where you're going and what you're kind of looking for. So when you get a project like that, I always, although I probably feel this with every single project I work on, there's always a moment at the beginning of every project, probably when I just take it on, where I'm struck with a sort of a degree of fear of, oh my, how am I going to do this? This person's asking for this, and this is like something I've not done before. And there's always that element of like, there's like a pressure that you to put on yourself to say, oh, I've got to kind of deliver here for who's
it's
asking.
It's like being handed someone else's baby, isn't it? Newborn.
And you don't want to ruin that chance.
Yeah, you've got my baby for a week. I'll see you later, and you're like, oh my gosh, so what? What the hell am I doing here with it?
Exactly. And you get that fear at the beginning, and then you get the fear again. I always find, the fear tends to come in two main stages. So I get the fear right at the beginning, where I know I've got to start it. And it's like starting anything. It's like when you're back in uni or in school and you had to start an essay or whatever it is, or a piece of coursework. And it's writing that first word or first line down is always the hardest, because you're like, oh, I've really got to start this. And excuse me. And then you start it. And then once you get going, I find I'm all right then. But then comes the second stage, which is usually when I've got the instrumental track done. And I'll send it to the artist and say, this is kind of what I've put together. This is what I'm thinking. This is how I reckon we can do the vocal production. But have a listen to the instrumental, see what you think. And that moment from when you send it to them and when you're waiting for the feedback, it never gets any less.
No.
Very tense, I would say.
Oh yeah. I mean, honestly, I will write myself off as a producer, as a writer, in about a million different ways in that space of whether it takes half an hour or 24 hours for them to come back to me. And but most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, that fear is unfounded, because even if you haven't got kind of exactly to where they're wanting to go, you're usually not far off. And that's why I think, as a producer, it's really, really important that at the beginning of the process, you have a really good conversation with the artist to really understand what it is they're wanting to achieve, what it is they want to do, what is it about the song that speaks to them, what kind of artists do they see themselves as. And I'll often ask for song references or references production wise of kind of where they're going with it, because otherwise you are shooting in the dark. So the more information you've got at the beginning, and the more understanding you've got of them, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day. It's not really about us stroking our own ego, although it's nice when things do well. It's basically about serving the artist or the writer that you're working with, so
Cool.
You sort of answered my next question, which is going to be, sometimes I find you get some artists that go, well, I've got the song, but I don't really know what I want, or this, that, the other. And they give you a bit of creative control, compared to, as you said, when you get those artists with the 400-page essay bullet point of breakdown of everything, examples, etc., etc. And as you said, that's actually really helpful. I said the more details, the better, because it gives you a framework to work in, generally speaking. Yeah. But do you get the opportunity? Do you still enjoy sometimes when an artist just goes, well, look, I don't really know, can you do something with this?
Yeah, I do. Because even if they don't give you kind of too much direction at the start, if you've done your job, or at least I'd like to think this is the way it works, if you've kind of done your job as a producer at the very beginning, there still should be some kind of conversation taking place, and you can find out a lot about somebody just by having a general chat with them, even if they don't give that much away and say, I just kind of want you to go with your instincts and just try something. You still hopefully should get a sense of what it is they want to say. So if they've got the lyrics written, you can look at the lyrics, you can get an idea of, you've probably had the conversation with them about the kind of artist that they like listening to. And so I always think there's lots of different kind of little things you can pick up on. And I mean, it was interesting actually. There was an artist I've just finished a project with. I'm actually about to start another song that I'm producing for her. She's based in the US, in Michigan, and she's kind of like a sort of soul R&B, but of a more retro vibe to it.
Nice.
But she kind of wants like a bit of a modern, sort of takes it that kind of like a Leon Bridges kind of vibe to her stuff. And she's been doing stuff for years, and she's had a lot of stuff placed on TV and film. And we got introduced via sort of like a mutual contact, a songwriter out of Nashville, and she'd heard some of my stuff and she asked to work with me. And so we had a chat, and she had this song, and it was really kind of, it was in a really bare demo form. It was a good song, but I was a little bit stuck as to, I thought, well, I'm not really sure where she wants to take this. And we had a conversation via Zoom, and we had a few conversations via email about how does she want to sort of approach it. And as I do with a lot of the artists I work with, I asked for song references of the kind of, or artist references, and she wouldn't really give them. She just said, well, she said, I'm my own artist. I don't want to copy somebody else's sound, and I really respected that. But at the same time, you've got to try and find a way of finding something from them, because the song in its demo form could have been done a million different ways, really. And in the end, she'd referenced a couple of different artists, and she said, just try some stuff. And she's a really nice person. We had a really good chat on Zoom, and I went away, did this sort of, the song's kind of got like, it's almost got like a hint of reggae in it, but it's almost got a bit of do you know any of the old the Paul McCartney Wings stuff from the 70s.
Yes, yeah.
You know, where it's kind of a bit quirky in places, and it's got that almost sort of McCartney 70s Wings vibe to it. So that was how I heard it. So I kind of went away, brought something back to the table, and an instrumental track, and sort of real live sort of, well, I say live drums programmed. I'm a drummer in a formal life, so that always helps when it comes to programming drums.
Man of many talents.
Well, hopefully it helps with making it a bit more kind of, it gives it that real sort of realistic, because the way I think is more real in a more sort of drummer's kind of mind. So I did this thing, I added guitars, bass and piano, and then I added that she had like this little bridge section where I added like this little mellotron kind of thing, which almost gave it a very Strawberry Fields kind of thing. So I sent it to her, and she came back to me and she said, I love it, but she said, I kind of want more of the reggae vibe. And it was interesting because at that point she referenced a particular song, and I can't remember which song it was now. It was by a particular artist that was a hit about 9 or 10 years ago. It's a great song, and I can't remember for the life of me what it's called. And I listened to it, and as soon as I heard it, it clicked. I knew exactly what she wanted. And I went away, and a couple of days later sent it back to her, and she like loved it. And then it was plain sailing from there. You know, she added the vocals, and then I did the mix. So that was a really good example of where sometimes you have to just venture out and try something, and hopefully you're not too far off the mark if you do have to start changing things.
So you mentioned about your songwriters who've inspired you to become a songwriter. Who would you say your biggest influences in producing this are?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a really, really good one. The likes of people like Tim Fraser, who has worked with people like Stormzy, and who's the? I can't. Do you know what? I'm having a mind blank today. But who's the one that's produced a lot of? Oh, I know, Paul Epworth, who's done a lot of Adele stuff.
Yeah,
and I love his stuff. I was going to say Ryan Tedder, but he's more as a songwriter, but also because he does produce stuff as well. Benny Blanco, I love. So, and then going right back, I even love, you know, a lot of the people like Brian Eno, Daniel Lanois, who's worked with U2, and I love, can't remember his name now, who works with Coldplay, Rick, and it's gone out of my head. But you know, and then even going further back to people like George Martin, you know, and people like from the 70s and the 80s, people like Stuart Levine. So there's so many. The guy, is it Ian Kilpatrick, who does a lot of Dua Lipa stuff? I just think is phenomenal. He's just absolutely incredible. I'm still, sonically, when you listen to sort of some of her records, they're just, as a pop producer, that's where I'm aiming. You know, that's like the bar, if you like. And every mix I do, I listen back and go, oh, it's close. Even though I'm pleased with what I've come up with, it's close, but it's not there, you know. And I think as a producer, you never stop trying to get better and taking inspiration from many, many different people, you know. Chris Lord Algie is another one, and Michael Brewer, people like that. You know, there's just so many, and all of them will all say that you never stop learning as a producer. No. There's always something new to learn, you know.
We're talking some of the details there, and I suppose not somewhat of a controversial thing for producers, or this is where heated debate happens on the internet. What is your DAW of choice? DAW. And for people that don't know, could you give a little quick explanation what a DAW actually is?
Yeah, sure. Well, my DAW of choice is Cubase. I'm on Cubase 10 at the moment, or 10.5. I've not made the jump to 11 yet. And I mean, I've been using Steinberg Cubase since about 2001, something like that. So
we are blood brothers in that sense.
Mate, you know, and I think this is the case. Whichever DAW you use, I think most people tend to be very loyal to them, and they tend to stick with one for years. But about Cubase. I mean, I think Cubase is incredible. But to answer your question, I guess the best sort of explanation of what a DAW is, as you say, digital audio workstation. It's basically the means in which you get sound from your keyboard, your vocal, your mic, and a means of recording it into your computer. And it's basically a studio in a box. And, as I'm sure you're probably aware, Nathan, as well, it's just absolutely incredible what you can do now. I remember when I first started seriously getting into like the sort of home studio recording and sort of doing things from home back in, as I say, nearly 20 years ago. I remember being amazed then. I think I had a computer that was worth about £400, something like that. It was a lot of money then, or £500, and that was secondhand. And it, it's definitely funny because I think it had like a 20 gig hard drive, and maybe I think it had 4 gig, 2 gig of RAM, maybe, I can't remember.
Wow.
But but you could do loads. It was amazing that you could do these recordings without having to pay to go into a big recording studio, but it was still noticeable then. Whereas now, I don't think you can hear the difference. Big recording studios will always have a place, particularly for big ensemble recordings or big band recordings, and certainly in terms of outboard gear and things like that. So it's definitely, they'll always have a place. But I think now, in terms of what you can build up in your own studio and record within that DAW, but unlimited tracks, and I mean, I use Cubase as my main software by means of which I actually record stuff in, but I'm using plugins for I don't know how many different manufacturers, So, and that combination together, I think, is just amazing. You just got to be careful not to get lost in all the tools that you can have at your disposal.
Yeah, that could be the tricky thing, isn't it? It's actually, I think for some people, it can be quite intimidating when it's so versatile and there's so many things on there. And even their own plugins, they've got hundreds of them. And if you don't really know what you're like, oh my gosh, I'll try that one and that one and that one. You could spend days and weeks just figuring out things like that. And because they have what's a Wavelab as well, which I think is for like mastering. Do you tend to stick everything on just in Cubase, or do you tend to stem out and put it into something else?
I'll tend to sort of do a mix down in Cubase, and then I'll take that into. It's funny actually you mentioned Wavelab. So I used to use years ago. I used to use Wavelab for mastering. I don't use Wavelab anymore, but I do still use it for certain things. So my chain, if you like, of from going from mix to master is that I mix down obviously in Cubase. Mix out a 24-bit stereo file. I'll then put that into Wavelab, and the only reason I put it into Wavelab is I will then edit the stereo file. I don't do any kind of sound processing to it, but I'll cut off any empty space at the beginning. If need be, I'll do any fade-ins or fade-outs at the end. So I'll do all that kind of editing in Wavelab, which literally only takes me 5 minutes or something like that. And then I'll export that edited stereo file. And then I use, currently for my mastering, I use Ozone 9 by Isotope, which is amazing. And I've been using Ozone for about probably 4 or 5 years, something like that. Mastering, I still get lost in mastering a little bit, and my masters have got much better, but really I think in the ideal situation, occasionally I do what's the word I'm looking for, I do sort of give out my mixes to mastering engineers to do professional masters, if you like, because it's a bit of an art form in itself, I think, mastering.
Definitely.
But Ozone is incredible for doing stuff,
You seem to have a good knack for quick explanations. Because I feel like our audience is going to be a lot of musicians and particularly home recorders, things like that, not producers. And again, they might hear these words, mix and master. Yeah. What's the difference?
Well, the difference for me, so the mix, I mean, essentially, mixing is where, taken right down to really simplistic view, if you've got your DAW, your digital audio workstation, be it Cubase, Logic, Pro Tools, whatever it is, and you've got your whole session files all in there, all your individual stems, you've got your drums, your vocals, your backing vocals, keyboards, guitars, and you've done all your processing, and your mixing is the process of making sure all those elements glue together, basically, to give you a cohesive kind of finished stereo file. And you'll find that you will do that all within your DAW. You might be using about 1 million different plugins, or you might only be using 5. Sometimes that's all that's needed, and you'll do all that, make sure everything is exactly where you want it to be. You want to mix down so that you've got, you don't want it to be too high level on mix down in terms of the output, because you want to give your mastering engineer, or you as the master, if you're the one who's doing the mastering, a little bit of headroom. And mastering, leading on to that, mastering is basically taking that finished stereo file, which is a mix down of all those individual elements, putting them into a mastering program, and then what you should be doing in the mastering stage is that it should be about enhancing what's already there and not fixing what's there. If you're finding that you're having to fix stuff in the master by EQing certain things out, or trying to use your EQ, or in terms of mid-side processing in a way in order to get rid of certain things, then you've probably not done a good enough job in the mixing stage. So I always say, if you've not got those elements right, go back to your mix, fix them first, and then in the master, it should be more about just bringing out the elements that are already there. And it's also that the mastering is the final stage in which you're then bringing up the overall level without completely squashing the dynamics of your of the song to a point, but where it brings it up to a level where it's competitive for, whether it's for streaming or for downloads, or, whatever it is. And then of course you've got you can start talking about the loudness wars, which is a whole other conversation.
Yes, yeah. I think that's the most basic mistake people make, and it's an easy one to do, is they mix too loud, or even in recording, they're recording everything almost at a live level where it's close to peaking straight away, and you've got nothing to do then, essentially. And unless you are unbelievably mixing it live in your studio and you get lucky, you've got so much no room for error, really. And as you say, you then got to EQ it, process it in different ways, and there's not much you can actually do, because the sound, there's just too much there, really. So I always say, get it clean and lower than you would think, and then you've got
and actually one of my bits of advice would be to anybody, whether it's up and coming producers or even songwriters who are just wanting to do demos and stuff. One of the biggest things that will really help with your mixing, and there's loads of tutorials out there on the internet, on YouTube and things like that, is learning about gain staging, because that, I know for me personally, as a producer many years ago, I kind of got it, but I didn't really. I think I was implementing it to a certain degree without realizing I was doing it, but in many ways I wasn't doing it correctly. And I found it was a game changer. Once you really understand gain staging in terms of how your mixes will sound, and in terms of knowing, getting the very best out of your mix, that's a big one. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think of a quick way of explaining gain staging, but it's basically the process of making sure that whatever you've got coming into onto your tracks, you're looking at the input levels all the time, and you start from the very top. From the moment that file, if it's a sample or whether it's a vocal, make sure you've got plenty of headroom there, and keep looking at that gain structure as you start adding more and more effects on, and more insert effects. But it was interesting what you said about mixing too loud. I think there's sometimes I've found, as I've gone on, that you start to realize that there are some rules. Once you know the rules, you can kind of break them to a certain extent as well. There are some mixes I've done that have been probably really loud compared to other mixes. But that's because everything's probably been mixed decently or well enough leading up to that point that there's still enough dynamics between the low and the high, so you can kind of push up your headroom a fair amount, so that, okay, you might not be increasing your headroom massively when you come to mastering, but it will sound even more competitive than something that's completely squashed in the mixing stage that might be actually lower in terms of the output volume of the mix. But because everything's dead squashed, when it comes to mastering, when you raise it, you're just raising a load of squash material.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I think it's interesting, and you're right. You can definitely squash a mix, and I think that's the distinction between a producer and someone trying to do sort of home recording is, if you're generally going off a rule of thumb, as I said, as you keep saying, leaving headroom, etc., you can make those mistakes, not controlling your gain properly.
Definitely.
And so it leads me to possibly my final question of this producer chat, really. We should create like a networking group of just, chatting to producers. There's loads of forums for that, actually. And if anyone is out there looking to do home recording, there's so many forums on millions of different websites that are so helpful when you're getting into it. But there is obviously
links at the bottom or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think we'd be there. I'd be there all day putting links for forums in, because there's millions of them.
Yeah,
but they're since coronavirus particularly, there's been this huge wave, of course, of home recording.
Yeah.
How have you found that as a producer? Not in terms of your own home recording, because that's as part of your job anyway, but in terms of, have you found artists coming to you saying, actually, I don't have a clue what I'm doing, or do you think it sort of helped the producer in a way?
That's an interesting one. I don't know whether the whole pandemic thing was interesting, because I went full time as a producer and writer in August or July of 2019. So I only got like a period of a few months up until the following March or whatever it was, when everything kicked off. And I personally didn't notice any difference, if anything. For me, as an entity or as a business, as a producer, it was interesting, actually. I got busier and busier as the pandemic unfolded, and that's partly probably in thanks to the fact that a lot of the stuff I do is remote work for people. So I think it focused minds a lot more, particularly artists and independent artists and musicians and people who wanted to start experimenting, because there was probably a lot of people out there who they probably got furloughed and all of a sudden probably found that they had a lot more time on their hands, and they were suddenly able to sort of say, do you know what, I'm going to use this time to get some things recorded. And although that being said, I don't know, thinking of all the artists I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot over the last couple of years, I don't know how many of them would say that that was the reason they got in contact with me, or whether it just happened to be a pandemic as well. But I've sensed, and you mentioned about Facebook groups and, online sort of producer groups and songwriter groups, things like that. I have noticed that it did definitely focus the minds of a lot of artists out there to really kind of go for it, and really kind of follow their passion and try things. Maybe they were playing it safe up until that point, and they had their job and they were having to manage the job and the music as well, and then all of a sudden maybe they were in a position where they did have more time. And so I don't know. I mean, personally, I didn't notice any major difference. I suppose I had a few more emails, because I get emails every so often from some producers, or like younger producers coming up who they're looking for work experience. And I don't know whether they probably realize that I'm mainly, I work on my own, and, I'm not a full studio facility. Everything I do is in my humble project studio here at the house that I share with my wife and son. So, so I noticed an increase in those emails from people who are wanting to find out more and learn more. Unfortunately, I can't. There's a lot of the time I can't really sort of bring any of those people in. I have done it once or twice for people, and I'll always, if I can, I'll always give advice to people. If anybody ever wants to know something, you know, I'm always happy to answer any questions within reason, as long as you know, it's hard sometimes because I'm thankfully so busy, but you know, it does mean that I struggle to find the time to answer everyday queries. But I think it's important to just support each other, because you know, there's plenty of producers out there that, as I was coming up, and they weren't even just producers, whether it was songwriters, whether it was like kind of mentors and people like that, who to this day I'm so thankful for just having the time to either talk to me or answer a simple question or something that made me go, you know, light bulb switch on kind of moment, you know. And it's just so important to kind of do that, you know. There's nothing wrong with a bit of healthy competition, but I don't really see it as kind of, you should never sort of feel like you're competing for work with other people. I think we all have our own, we all have something to bring to the table, you know. And again, it all comes down to whether you're the right fit for a particular artist. Some artists, I've worked, it's not happened that often, but there's been one or two where I've worked with and it's not worked out. And I guess I wasn't the right fit, or, you know, maybe we didn't really gel in terms of how we, you know, what was going to be the best for them and for their vision. And, you know, sometimes you have to say no to projects, and other times you get people you work with and you just click like that. And but it's ultimately about bringing out the best for them, you know.
So go on then. Here we go. One cheesy question for you.
Go on.
What advice would you give? Hang on, sorry. This is why it takes 40 minutes, so I've got it in the evening. What advice would you give to somebody who wanted to become a producer?
My best advice would be, I mean, it depends on what stage of the career they're at, is to listen to as much music as you can. Doesn't matter whether it's music that's outside of your preferred sort of genre to work in, but just listen to everything, and appreciate the work that goes into all different kinds of work. Listen to music from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right up until now. All of it's relevant, because the more understanding you've got about music, it's not just about, you know, processing the sound, it's about understanding the music as well. I'd say you really need to take the time to really learn your craft. And the best way to learn it is by experimenting and trying stuff out all the time. And any up and coming producers now are so lucky in that there's so many online resources for them to learn. I mean, when I first started, it was, you know, I learned stuff either through reading, buying a book on audio engineering and things like that, or whether it was studying. When I studied at the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, I studied production there. But you know, you didn't really have the internet, or it was in its very early stages. YouTube is incredible for tutorials, and there's so many fantastic resources. There's a great one that I subscribe to now, and I subscribe on YouTube for pop producers. There's one that I'd recommend, which is by a guy called, don't know if you've heard of him, Nathan. His name's Austin Hull, and he's got a YouTube channel.
Great.
He's amazing. MakePopMusic.com, and he's got a YouTube channel. And I've learned so much watching his videos. I never stop learning. I'm always looking to learn new stuff and get another person's take on stuff. He's incredible for his YouTube content, and he offers all sorts of sample packs and, you know, sounds and presets for synths and stuff like that. And then one that I subscribe to, which I think is amazing, and I'd recommend any up and coming producer to check out, is Mix with the Masters. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but Mix with the Masters is incredible. That's more based on the mixing side of things, but not exclusively. And that's just a series of seminars and tutorials with big name producers from all over the world, talking about how they delving into certain tracks, how they deconstructing the mix, and how they, you know, approach certain things. So make use of the resources you've got, because there is unlimited resources out there. And the biggest one, more so than all of that, in my mind, whatever it is you're wanting to do in music, is be humble, be kind, and be willing to learn, and just be nice to people. Because I swear you can have sort of, you know, a degree of talent that takes you a certain place, up to a certain level. But if you're a nice person, you're willing to get on with people and meet people and chat to them, and a willingness to learn, that will take you so much further. And generally, I think I'm hopefully, and I don't say this to big myself up, because I generally don't mean it like this, but hopefully I'm proof of that. And what I mean by that is, I wasn't born with in my opinion, with like a kind of a supernatural talent or anything like that. I was just happened to be passionate about music and loved writing and loved starting to get into production and stuff. But, you know, all that can be learnt. But in terms of getting on in the industry, you've got to be able to get on with people. And I think that's a huge thing.
That is that is so essential, I think, because, you know,
Yeah.
I think it's a problem for a lot of musicians is, you know, we had someone say, and it's become my like favorite phrase from this podcast, is no one gets into music if they don't want attention, you know. And I think that's true to some extent, but you're right. There's a point where you've got to go, actually, one, I'm not the best at this. Two, millions of other people do it, you know, at the end of the day. Three, you know, if you're going to play anywhere or produce for anything or anything like that, you've got to have other people, you know. And that doesn't mean you have to start a band. That doesn't mean you have to co-produce with someone, but you need to rely on people and get on with people to to achieve anything, you know. And something I'd say onto the back of that as well, for anyone up and coming, is I think some people can get scared about equipment and money and things like that. There's so much out there now. You don't have to start with everything.
So true.
There's I know professional producers that still use Reaper, you know, which is 60 quid every 2 generations or something like that. So £60 every 4 or 5 years, and it's a brilliant tool. It's brilliant, you know, and you can do it with a simple Behringer desk. I still have a Behringer desk. Cost me like 400 quid, you know, and you can get to know those pieces of equipment, and you can start. You don't need a Shaw mic. You don't need a SM, this, that, the other, blah, blah, blah. You can find other ones that can help you start, and just get out and do it, you know.
It's so true. And it's that old adage of, you know, it's kind of how you use the tools, you know. It's not always about what tools you've got. Yeah, okay, you need, to a certain degree, you need, but like you say, even something half decent, you can get these things so cheap now. And also, for a lot of people that can't afford like a big outlay, a lot of like the plugin manufacturers now work on this subscription model, which is fantastic, you know, and makes things very affordable for people. But like you say, get to know the basics and kind of actually work with practice, trying to create something using maybe only a limited amount of things. And actually, that's a good one for any producer to do occasionally. And something actually maybe I'll tell myself to do is, next time I approach a project, is maybe to say to myself, right, I am only going to allow myself to use this, this, and this, because actually it can really force you into making sort of maybe better decisions, you know, because it is easy to get lost in the amount of stuff that's available to you, you know. And I was guilty of that. I remember there was, for a period of time, even up until a couple of years ago, there was a period of time where every project I was in, I felt like I was spending so long trying to find the perfect kick drum, and or, you know, scrolling through like my whole library of like 1,000 kicks and trying to find the right one for the right song or whatever it was. And, you know, I don't really do that anymore. You know, I've got you should have certain go-tos, and you know which ones work. And if it's in the ballpark, usually it'll do, because you can always process the kick later on. But don't overthink things, you know, just kind of get on with it, because there's probably an element of procrastination going on there as well, stopping you from starting, you know. So just get on with it. If you need to change something, go back later and change it, but just make a start and just try things out, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes accidents happen that way as well. Good, happy
very
accidents.
true. Yeah, and I also say try. It's difficult with the pandemic, but try live sound engineering.
Yeah,
basic is a great
absolutely.
start. You start to understand how EQs work, how gain
Definitely.
works, and things like that, and you get a better understanding of what you want to create live. I think you can
Absolutely.
get a better understanding of, I know how to do that on a record now because I did it in this room.
Exactly.
And as you said, you can never stop learning. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't start. You can't, because you're not just gonna. Oh, I've read all the books now. I've done this, that, the other. I'm ready. No, it's better to just go for it because you will stumble upon things all the time.
Absolutely, yeah, so true.
I suppose the final thing we need to find out is where can we find you as a music producer online?
You can find me I'm on Instagram, which is DSM Music Official. So it's because my main producer name or name for my brand, if you like, or business as a producer is DSM, which is Delta Sierra Mike. So it's Instagram is DSM Music Official. Facebook is facebook.com/DSM Music Official. I've got a website which artists and clients, songwriters can get in touch with me via there, which is dsmmusic.com. I'm on Twitter, but I hardly ever go on Twitter, so I don't think I'll even bother giving that one out. But they're the main ways in which people can get to me. And I'm always here to answer any queries, and looking to work with different people. And if but they can find out most about me probably through my website initially. And there's like a contact us form on there, and there's like a show reel of stuff that I do and everything, so
awesome.
Awesome. Thanks for giving us your time today. It's been a real pleasure.
No problems. I've enjoyed it. I've loved chatting. It's been fantastic. Thanks for having me, guys. It's been
you're very welcome.
Been really, really good. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.